What happens when mediocre sales candidates suddenly start interviewing like top producers? What if your hiring process can no longer reliably tell the difference between real sales talent and AI-assisted interview polish? I'm Dr. Chris Croner, author of Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again and principal of SalesDrive, where we help companies hire salespeople with the drive to grow revenue. In this video, we're going to talk about why AI tools like ChatGPT have fundamentally changed sales hiring. Not because they instantly create great salespeople, but because they dramatically improve how candidates present themselves during interviews. We'll break down why the shift is happening, why sales hiring is uniquely vulnerable, why weak interview processes have become increasingly dangerous, and what companies need to evaluate instead if they want salespeople who can actually generate revenue consistently. Now, to be fair, interview preparation isn't new. Candidates have always practiced answers. People have always rehearsed objections. Mock interviews have existed forever. None of that changed. What changed is the speed, accessibility, and sophistication of preparation. Today, a candidate can open ChatGPT and instantly receive customized interview answers, behavioral interview coaching, role play preparation, objection handling practice, resume optimization, company-specific research, even coaching on tone, confidence, and executive presence. And importantly, the quality is often extremely good. A candidate no longer needs years of experience to sound polished and strategic. AI can manufacture interview polish very quickly. Now, of course, some candidates who prepare aggressively with AI may absolutely have high drive. Serious preparation can absolutely reflect ambition, conscientiousness, and motivation. So, companies need better systems for separating sustained sales capability from interview performance. A low-drive candidate under financial pressure, for example, may work extremely hard to win the job, but then still struggle with the daily behavioral demands of hunting for new business once they're actually in the role. Because preparing for an interview is a short-term performance. Building pipeline month after month under rejection and quota pressure is long-term. It's a long-term behavioral pattern, and that distinction matters because AI improves presentation quality much faster than it improves the deeper behavioral traits associated with sustained sales success because it can't improve those traits. This is where things become dangerous for hiring teams. AI creates more polished candidates, not necessarily stronger salespeople, more polished candidates. A weak salesperson can now sound strategic, consultative, thoughtful, highly prepared, emotionally intelligent, even executive level. They can structure answers beautifully. They can reference sales frameworks. They can tell cleaner stories. They can communicate with far more polish than before. But underneath all of that, the underlying drive may still be missing. And here's the biggest problem. Most interviews already overvalue confidence, charisma, communication skill, verbal smoothness, interview polish. To be sure, those traits matter, but they're not the same as sustained revenue production, especially in difficult hunting environments. And this is the core issue. AI won't necessarily create better salespeople. It will create more convincing lookalikes. And the more surface level your hiring process is, the harder it will become to separate candidates who can truly sustain performance from candidates who simply interview well. Sales hiring is uniquely exposed to this problem, of course, because sales interviews are heavily conversation-based. The evaluation often becomes, how confident do they sound? How polished are they? How well do they communicate? Can the candidate think on their feet effectively? The problem is, high-performing sales hunters and polished interviewees are not always the same people. Some elite salespeople are actually kind of rough around the edges in interviews. So for example, they may not sound corporate enough. They may not communicate flawlessly. But once they enter the field, they outperform everyone. Why? Because sales success often depends far more on persistence, competitiveness, resilience, emotional endurance, consistency under rejection, tolerance for pressure, and sustained effort over long periods of time. Those qualities are much harder to fake consistently. A candidate may sound excellent for 45 minutes, but can they prospect every day? Will they recover emotionally after rejection? Will they maintain activity under quota pressure? Will they continue performing after losing deals? Will they stay aggressive during difficult stretches? That is an entirely different conversation. And AI currently helps far more with interview presentation than with long-term behavioral consistency. So, if polished answers to standard sales interview questions become less predictive, what should companies evaluate instead? They need to assess the deeper behavioral patterns associated with sustained performance. For example, for need for achievement, does this person internally push themselves toward difficult goals? Not because a manager is watching, but because they genuinely need to achieve. For competitiveness, do they naturally keep score? Do they hate losing? Do they want to outperform their peers? Do they seek difficult environments? For optimism, can they recover emotionally after rejection? Salespeople deal with failure constantly, and optimistic people tend to re-engage faster instead of emotionally spiraling after setbacks. And importantly, strong hiring teams don't stop at surface answers. Weak interviewers, of course, ask one question and then they move on. Strong interviewers keep digging. They know the best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. So for example, if a candidate says something like, "I'm highly competitive," the weak interviewer says, "Great." The strong interviewer, on the other hand, says, "Tell me about a time you lost. What happened afterward? How did you respond emotionally? What changed in your behavior?" Now, give me another example. That deeper probing becomes much harder to sustain artificially, especially across repeated follow-up questions. Strong hiring teams also look for longitudinal evidence because high-drive people often leave behavioral trails over time. So patterns like sustained achievement orientation, repeated self-improvement, competitive environments, unusually high activity levels, persistence after setbacks, difficult goals pursued voluntarily all matter. A weak candidate can rehearse stories, but it's much harder to fake an entire long-term behavioral pattern consistently. And this is why structured assessments become increasingly valuable in the AI era. Not because anything is perfectly AI-proof, but because structured systems can become more resistant to surface-level interview inflation, especially when they evaluate deeper behavioral tendencies instead of relying entirely on self-description and interview polish. So, here's what I think is going to happen next. Weak interviews are going to break first. Generic interviews become dramatically less predictive. Questions like, "Tell me about yourself. What's your biggest weakness? Why should we hire you? What motivates you?" Those questions rapidly lose value. Why? Because AI can prepare candidates for them extremely well, which means surface-level interviewing becomes easier and easier to manipulate. And companies relying primarily on generic conversations will likely make more expensive hiring mistakes. Now, we're not talking about small mistakes, revenue mistakes, quota misses, turnover, lost pipeline, lost time, damaged sales culture. At the same time, however, strong hiring systems now become more valuable than ever. And that means structured behavioral interviews, probing follow-up questioning, evidence-based evaluation, structured scorecards, longitudinal behavioral analysis, well-constructed assessments, and systems designed to identify drive, not just polish. Because in the AI era, sounding impressive is no longer rare. Actually, sustaining revenue performance still is. As AI makes candidates more polished, companies are going to need stronger ways to identify who can actually sustain performance under rejection, pressure uncertainty, and quota expectations. The companies that adapt early will likely avoid a massive wave of costly sales mishires. The companies that don't may find themselves hiring candidates who interview like top performers, but struggle once real selling begins. If you want to learn more about evaluating drive, competitiveness, optimism, need for achievement, and the deeper behavioral traits associated with sustained sales success, check out our additional resources on structured interviewing and sales hiring assessments below. Just click the link below the video. Because in the next era of hiring, the best interviewee and the best salesperson may become two very different people. Again, I'm Dr. Chris Croner, and remember, it all starts with drive.